Okay, well, I am excited for today's topic, board committees and philanthropy committees. What's the difference, right? I think that many of you probably experience this question quite often, and there's clearly overlap. There's clearly oftentimes confusion on roles, and we're hoping that today's session will give you the help you feel empowered as you go forth and helping to clearly define the roles. But, just a little tip on this session today is we're going to remind you that no matter what your role, if you are an organization that has philanthropy in any way, shape, or form, everyone on both of these teams needs to be engaged in the process in some way. So without spoiling too much of the session, I'm going to hand it over to Jake to get us started. Can y'all hear him? Jake, we cannot hear you. So while you're playing with that, let's go ahead and advance, and I will just get us started. Let's see if we can't troubleshoot, but I won't delay. Do you want to? Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So board committees, right? What are our board committees? So you all have a board. How many of you actually have two boards? You have like an operator board for a parent organization and a fundraising board. Do some of you have two boards? Probably. So sometimes that can be confusing as well. For the most part, we're going to make the assumption that we are talking about your board for your foundation or your philanthropy entity, but it can be somewhat transferable in discussion as well. So think about this, but the committees of your boards are small groups of individuals who advise the board as a whole on a specific area of operations, right? A board exists for oversight of the operations. So to allow for the work to be distributed evenly throughout our board, we're going to utilize areas of expertise to lighten the load. You may have different requirements in your bylaws for the varying different committees. And if you move forward to that next slide, I'll go through what some of those committees may be when we're looking.
And while you're doing that, I'm just going to test my mic really quick. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're good, Jake.
All right.
Good. Perfect.
Yes.
All right.
Being my own IT department today. All right. Thanks so much, Marty. Sorry about that.
No
all
problem.
set up now. But yeah, wanted to kind of walk through some of the standard committees that a lot of nonprofits have and kind of the why. A lot of you may have a lot of these already or some combination. It is advisable typically to have a board that is large enough that you can break into these subgroups. A lot of times people say, well, we got 8 people total on our board and we need these 5, 6 committees and everybody's going to have to serve on 2 or 3. And that becomes a lot. There's a lot of extra time outside the hours and you're going to end up burning out a lot of your volunteers. So this is one of those things that if your board is small, your nonprofit's just starting out, you're growing, that you can kind of add these as you feel it's appropriate. We've worked with some organizations that have boards that are in like the 40 plus, perfect for this, definitely. And people can rotate on and off of different board committees for different reasons, but just want to caution you that I don't want you to see this slide and go, oh my gosh, we don't have a nominating, investment, and finance committee. We need to get those up and running first, when the reality is if you have the bandwidth and the time that maybe someone serves on 1, at most maybe 2 of these subcommittees is usually optimal for the organizations that we work with and that we see, mostly because we do want our volunteers, our board members to stay engaged with us. And if they're spread around several different organizations, they're definitely not going to be fundraising for us as well. And really all, as Marty mentioned, everything that we're talking about today is to the end of what are we doing to drive philanthropic revenue to the organization. All these things are great. We do have governance. We'll talk about some of the differences in key roles for the people that we recruit. But at the end of the day, we want to talk about money and money in the door in terms of ongoing revenue and ongoing revenue growth. So just to kind of walk through these, the executive committee, this usually consists of people who kind of help manage, especially when you have a larger team of different board subcommittees and that kind of thing. There's just kind of a group that helps administrate the whole thing and can use their expertise to kind of keep the whole thing running, to take some of that burden off of the C-suite, off the development team, and off of the staff, hopefully. Ideally, for finance and audit committee, you want to have individuals who have experience in these things. Not that anyone can't do this, and even if you're a business owner or you've worked in sales, you've worked in finance, any of these things are helpful to have professionals in the finance field, or in the tax field, or in the real estate attorney field, people who kind of have adjacent jobs to that, who can lend their expertise as well as their time, really makes a big difference. So to say, who do we put on these committees? And you can actually look at building your overall board in terms of, let's see if we can get some talent in the legal expertise area. Let's see if we can get some talent in the finance expertise area. And we know that's a really, really important one. And it's helpful to have people who already know the things and can just lend their profession a couple of hours a month to your organization as well. The same goes for the investment, especially if you have any kind of endowment fund, or if you're managing ongoing funds that you don't want to just sit in a checking account. If you have anything over 10,000, especially if you have in the 100,000 or $1 million+ amounts, you definitely want to be investing that at least in a, not necessarily in an aggressive way, but in a stable way where you're going to get some return on that each year. And to have some people who know a little bit about that, can even go through their own organization in some cases, to kind of work through that. Nominating committee, if you're not familiar, some of you may be, is the process of churning and getting new board members signed on, saying we want to have at least 20 or 25 or 40 or 10, pick a number. It actually might be predetermined for you in your bylaws, so how many you're allowed to have and how many, what the bare minimum is. But as people rotate off, or if you have that board member who's been absent a few times and we have to ask to rotate off, which happens in a lot of cases, to have a group of people whose main secondary job, it's kind of an oxymoron, but main secondary job is it to bring in new board members into the fold. With that, the one that gets overlooked, and you'd think it would be obvious, but is the actual fundraising committee, or at least the executive team who sits on the philanthropy council, the foundation volunteers, the fundraising volunteers, whatever you call it in your organization, to have some say. Now, we have a lot of organizations who've had, especially if they have two boards, and this is many of you probably on this call as well, where you have kind of the governing board and they kind of administrate the organization. And there's often a second fundraising board or a second foundation board. We highly recommend to have at least one person sit on both, or have a representative from each that have even a voting seat on both, to kind of keep that informed. Maybe it's just that they give a report. Here's what the fundraising arm of the organization has done this quarter. Quick 30-second or 2-minute report on where we are dollars wise, new donors wise, but it makes a big difference. So as you're kind of building this out, this is not necessarily we have to do this in this order. We just know that these tend to be the most effective. And again, this is coming from the kind of the top down board governing level, the people who the C-suite or the executive director would report to in this case. So always starts with good board governance. We know that the most successful nonprofits are the ones that have the best volunteers in town, the most talented, the most experienced. We want to have the best people on our board. And we can start by kind of subcategorizing if our board is big enough to organize into each of these areas. All right, next slide. Fantastic. So in terms of our philanthropy committees, this is specifically the fundraising arm of the volunteer support. So kind of an interesting Venn diagram here. This is just the fundraisers among just the volunteers. So there's plenty of people who are responsible for fundraising. There's plenty of people on the team who are paid staff. We're talking specifically about volunteers who spend their time to drive revenue through finding donors, spending time cultivating those donors, and then eventually asking for money, or having the staff come with you to ask for money, but have that kind of support. And if you can boil down the purpose into just a few words, it's supporting the mission by leveraging philanthropic support, so specifically dollars, in a whole multitude of ways. So where we run into the most problems, especially with new organizations that we're just starting out with, new clients saying, I have a hard time getting my board engaged in philanthropy, or that's a question that we ask, like, how is your board's engagement in philanthropy? Tell us a little bit about that. And 9 times out of 10, it's like, well, we got a couple people who do well, and most of them are really not participating much. And no matter what I say, no matter what I ask, they won't do it. And this is a common problem. So this is youth, and then definitely don't feel bad. This is most nonprofits in this case. The reason that we have found that tends to be an issue for most nonprofits is that those board members were not recruited specifically to fundraise when they signed up, or when the nominating committee or whoever talked them into serving on this board. Oh yeah, we fundraise, but you won't have to ask it. They might have actively been told they don't have to fundraise, or maybe it's in the bylaws written somewhere, but we never verbally expressed it. We only mentioned it in passing, or you even have a culture of there's not really an expectation that any of us participate in giving. And usually the answer is like, okay, great. I know that's the problem. I've identified that. What are we actually doing to turn that around? A lot of times it's really tough to get people who specifically signed up not to fundraise to change their mind about it. So that may be a couple of things. It may be rotating people off and on and replacing them with people who do have the expectation to help raise money. And it may be looking at everyone on the board saying, okay, we can actually categorize specifically by connectors, cultivators, and closers, and we don't have to have everyone go find their own prospects, sit down with them, talk about the mission and the project, and ask them for money. Saying we would love to have everyone engaged in the process, but serving as connectors, so those individuals who come up with the names and list the people they think might want to join the mission, give, serve, all of that. Cultivators are the people who kind of tell that story and are able to sit down and talk about the why, the project, they know the ins and outs. And the closers are the people who actually have no problem saying, I'd love to have you consider a gift, or won't you join my family in giving $10,000? It's very rare that we find anybody, even professional fundraisers, who are great at all three of these things. So to sit down and kind of divide people up, saying, okay, if you don't want to go ask your friends for money, that's totally fine. Can you help us get in the door with some of these people that you're connected to? Now, the obvious and the easy way out, the cop-out answer, is for people to say, here's a list of names. I've made a list of names. Go talk to these people. But if these people are as influential or wealthy or connected as they claim, they will probably never take our call because they know we're coming. They don't have any connection to the organization. So as connectors, it's not just a matter of, hey, I'm going to offer you to come and here's the list and go talk to these people. But can you set up a meeting with the three of us? Can you actually do the part of the connection where you contact these people and say, hey, I'm going to call you, or connect us via mutual email, or set up a lunch with all three of us there? So it's not just, though, I can give you a list of names. That's the easy part. But actually doing the setting up of the first introductory meeting, which is the hardest part of the fundraising process, is getting that first meeting. From there, there's people who can talk about their why and why they serve, and that's wonderful. And there's people who can have no problem asking for money, and the staff can fulfill those roles as well. But just making sure that when people serve in a philanthropic way on those boards, that it doesn't necessarily mean they have to raise money, but we do ask, hey, can you help get us connected to a few people who can? Ideally, everyone does. We know that's not the reality. We know these people weren't asked to do that necessarily when they signed up, but they can get us in the door. And that's very, very important. Okay, next slide. Here are some examples of just philanthropy committees. Some of you may have some combination of these. The executive is kind of the administrative arm, helping kind of put all the pieces together, figure out what top prospects to assign to which. Then you have kind of your top level cash giving. We call those either signature and special. Annual and employee, this is your base of support typically. This is your 80% of your donors, anything under $1,000 a year, payroll deduct, that kind of thing. Business, exactly what it sounds like, looking for support for both foundations and either local businesses or national businesses that have a local branch in your community. Planned is anything in estate giving, wills, trusts, life insurance policies, that kind of thing. And then even stewardship, which aren't actively asking for money, but do a really nice job of keeping our existing donors happy, excited, connected to the organization, informed, well thanked. And we know it's tremendously less expensive to keep a donor than it is to find a new one, obviously. So that's a big deal for us, for sure. So again, you may have some combination of these. We encourage you to have most or all of these because it gives you a really well-rounded portfolio of people working at the different giving types and different giving levels, but just some to consider. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you came to this session and specifically looking for the answer to the question, here is where we, from the organizations that we work with, can kind of separate these different committees and kind of their overall function. So board committees are for operationalizing the foundation or the fund development department. So if there is a campaign, if there is a project, working with the executive team to kind of put the structure in place and help move everything. We hope also that they open doors, maybe ask for gifts, definitely give themselves. Marty will talk about that in a minute. But the biggest thing is kind of the admin operational side of the campaign. The philanthropy committees themselves are responsible for the actual asking for the money part. They're the fundraising themselves to further and sustain the mission. So the reason that we do this is because when we're asking time for our volunteers, we say, well, we want you to do a great job at helping govern and administrate our nonprofit. We have to have the best people. We want to find people who are going to give a couple hours a month to us, and you're it, and we want you to serve. And we want everyone to do a great job going out, connecting, and asking for money. And we find that both of those things are not that time consuming, but combined can be very time consuming. You know, each of these commitments are probably 3 to 5 hours a month, typically for volunteers. And you add those together, you suddenly look at 6 to 10 hours a month, which is still not a full-time job. I understand that's not that much, but you know, you're looking at 2+ hours a week at that point. And for busy people, that may be a stretch. So instead of trying to get everyone to do everything, we're going to separate these two into these kind of more specific critical components and say, everybody just do a great job with your one assignment. And we find that's a lot more successful, and it keeps our volunteers engaged and sticking around a lot longer. So that is kind of the overall summary of that. We're going to get to a little more detail, but if you want to boil it down, that's what we're looking at when we're looking at the two different types of committees. Next slide. Regardless of placement or position, the role of all committee members, again, is growth of philanthropic revenue. So no matter what we're doing, whether we're looking at the governing board, the overall board, the fundraising, every single list of volunteers we have, what we're trying to do with all of them is drive more money to the mission so that we can serve more people at the end of the day. So we say, what's the point of having this committee or that, or fundraising or governance? It's all in the name of better supporting financially, because that's 9 times out of 10, 99 out of 100, what it takes to change anything is money. And we want every single person that we have working for us, with us, to be some part of that continuum of philanthropic revenue. It's by far the most important thing that any of them can do. So as we're thinking about what's the point of this, how are we organizing, how does this support us, we still want to be thinking, oh, we're fundraising, we're connecting, we're getting out in the community. Those things are all great, but if we're not directly pointing at the financial impact that each of these have, we might want to reevaluate a little bit of how we're using our volunteers' time. So what do we need from all volunteers serving on any committee, Marty?
Thank you, Jake. Before I go into that, I just have to say, do you notice that Jake did not say their job is to oversight of the funds that you raised and spend the money, right? I think so often we get in that little dynamic where they think, well, I sit on that board and I oversee that money and I help make decisions on how it's allocated, versus active fundraising, versus thinking that I am actively fundraising. So how is it that we can get them to think in this way? Hopefully these needs that we have from them are front and center, and that helps to establish that very clear objective of the roles of everyone. So need number one, we've got to have everyone on the team give financially themselves. I understand that not every person in the world can make a financial philanthropic gift. Guess what? If they can't or aren't willing to make a gift to your organization, they're just not going to be as effective for you. You will lose credibility, right? If your board is not giving, if your committees are not giving. When somebody says, oh my goodness, I know Elizabeth, she is super involved there, I'm going to ask her what she's doing. And if she says, oh, I don't do anything, like, I just think you should, we've lost that prospect, right? So need number one is give financially themselves. Next slide, please. So why do they have to give? They're giving so much time already, right? Why would they have to give financially as well? Y'all, we are a fundraising board. We ask for money. That is why we exist, right? We need that financial philanthropic support to have the impact of all the great work that's being done. So we need to unapologetically make it very clear that we're asking people to do this. We have to do it ourselves, right? So we know as well that people give to people, right? And there are no magic words in fundraising, but if there were, it would be join me. I have chosen to do this because I am passionate about this organization for XYZ reason. I hope you will join me. This is what I've chosen to do. Join me at this level, right? People give to people. They may not even take the time to do their own homework on what it is that that organization actually does, because they trust that you have done that homework. And they're like, wow, if Steve's involved with that, I should be too. I think Steve's a great guy. He has, probably spent time researching this. And if he trusts it, I'm going to trust it. Right. So we know that people give to people. And another reason, their names and their donations establish trust, right? There we are, back to that trust. So that is establishing the trust that we need to go forth and ask others, right? So how do we get through that? Everyone needs to give financially, right? We have to set the expectation of 100% giving from our volunteers at a level that's comfortable for them, right? We need to recruit people to places where they are comfortable making their own gift. And if we somehow put them on the wrong seat on the bus, let's establish that up front, right? If we think someone has the ability to make a signature gift and we put them on that team and they keep procrastinating making their own personal commitment, perhaps they're not on the right seat on the bus. Maybe we might need to reassess and get them at a level that they are comfortable making their own gift and asking others to join them at that same level, right? And how else? We do need to utilize peer pressure sometimes, right? Because we need to inspire giving by all of the individuals that make up the group, right? And you've got to make sure you set this expectation up front. If I'm sitting around a boardroom table and I know that every single other person has made their gift and I know that it's 100% giving, hopefully I'm going to be inspired, or I'm going to figure out that maybe that's not the right place for me, right? So we've got to make sure we set these expectations up front and unapologetically know that everyone on the team needs to make their own financial commitment. Number two, what else do we need from all board members, whether they are the governing board or the philanthropy, right? We know that they need to be trained, comfortable, and active in the process of raising money, even if that is not their primary job. If I am on the operational board and I am on the finance committee, I need to understand what the rest of the team is out there actively doing and be willing to contribute in some way to that process, right? We know that if we understand, if we find that place that we're comfortable, that we can move the needle tremendously. So everybody on the team really should be engaged in some level of training to be a part of what's going on, regardless of what board that they're serving on. So why do we need this? These are the same reasons why we need 100% giving, right? We are a fundraising board. We are asking for money. First and foremost, we know that people give to people, and their names and their donations establish trust. So if we can clearly and effectively communicate this to everybody on the team and give them the tools that they need to help us in some way, we have just drastically, exponentially expanded our networks. And that is the name of the game on inspiring those gifts, right? So how are we going to make sure that everyone is trained, comfortable, and active? We help them identify what their role can be, right? Not everyone can do everything comfortably in the fundraising process. And I would suspect that even those volunteers that we have recruited specifically to fundraise have a little bit of trepidation sometimes, right? You say the word fundraising, people freak out. It's not generally something that people are comfortable with until we have a conversation with them and we let them know that they can do something that they do all the time anyway, right? Your people are connecting all the time. Your people are storytelling all the time. They are brokering deals in their businesses and know how to close. You have the tools that exist within the people. We just have to help them identify if they are that connector, cultivator, or closer. And everyone can help in some way in the process and make us that much more effective, right? So we need to get them engaged in a role that empowers them. I would venture to bet every single person that works with volunteers on this call today had someone who was like, oh, no, 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 I'm not a fundraiser. But if you were able to help them identify where they could make a difference, they got a little taste of that when you had a successful gift. And then they wanted to do more, right? Because they were empowered. They're like, wow, all I did was sit at that lunch meeting and heard you talk about it, which you do such a great job of. And I got credit, like I got thanked and recognized for that amazing gift. I helped make that happen. I'm going to want to go back for more, right? People like and respond to positive reinforcement. So if we get them engaged in a role that they are successful at, they are going to feel empowered and they're going to want to do it more. So it is so important to make sure that we utilize the training and educational programs that you have available to you to get everyone up to speed so that they can figure out where they can help the most. Because at the end of the day, I don't think that most people on your board just want to just go sit on your board and have lunch. They actually want to help. So let's empower them to do something that they're good at that helps us too. Win, 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 right? Next slide, please. So just a disclaimer, again, some may just only give, and not that that isn't enough, right? Some may just only give, but guess what? We can establish that 100% of our board is giving. So when we are completing a grant application and ask that question, we can say yes. When we have someone in the community say, what is your board doing? We can say 100% is giving, right? So some may just do that. Again, I don't want to underplay, like that's important. That's great. So just know that that might happen. Some may only give and be on an operational committee. Again, maybe I'm serving on the finance committee, but I have made my gift. But guess what? They need to understand the process and be supportive of the fundraising roles that others are playing, because you never know when I may be at a holiday cocktail party. And if I have been trained and I have been told about it, I might be able to be a connector. And when we plant those seeds, people are empowered to go forth and they naturally and organically start to become part of your process, even if they are not technically on one of your philanthropy teams. So just remember that. All right, in recap, we have two different sets of committees with two different roles, right? But they are united in one ultimate goal of raising money, right? We know that's the name of the game. We know that has to drive, it has to be our guiding force for everything that we're doing, because that is truly what we exist for. We can have overlap for continual flow of communication. We've got to find ways to have that overlap of communication, to bring them together, to make them understand they're all on the same team. I think sometimes we have a lot of silos in our organizations. We have got to find ways to have that overlap, because that continual flow of communication, again, it empowers and it gives them greater ability to impact, right? And last but definitely not least, all should give financially and understand the fundraising process. So if you take nothing else away from this today, I do hope that we remember everyone in the team, regardless of what their other roles are, should give financially and understand the fundraising process and what is being done to generate revenue and bring in that important philanthropic support for your important missions. With that, I am going to open it up for questions. You scared me there, Trish. I was like, did I miss a slide? Does anyone have any questions? How many of you, show of hands for those of you that are on the screen, feel like, yeah, we are knocking it out of the ballpark. We do all this really well. How many of you feel like there's a little tidbit that they could take to improve? I like that so, right? I think if we're honest with ourselves, there's always a little tidbit that we can go and take back and do something just a little bit better to make sure that we are as effective as possible. So I hope that for you all, as you look to the new year, that you have the opportunity to really get your board and your committees and all of your volunteers engaged on the same team, rowing in the same direction for that ultimate financial philanthropic impact. All right. If there are no questions, then I'm going to just leave you with, again, please make sure to follow us on LinkedIn if you don't already. We've got some really great content, excuse me, pushing out weekly there.